transferred to that respective reserve. Other transfers that we saw at the end of the year to and from reserves that were not originally part of the budget process. We saw a transfer out of the building services reserve as a result of requiring more funding for that operation for 2012. We saw a small surplus in our, or I guess a small increase in what we had anticipated in supplementary taxation revenue. So with that, that is a contribution that is made to our working reserves as well for policy. And then within parking, our revenue exceeded what we had originally anticipated, so there's a fairly reasonable contribution to the parking reserve of $73,000. So those are the contributions to our reserves that were effective as of the end of 2012. If we look at the next slide, it's a consolidated statement of our financial activities, and we're really comparing 2011 to 2012, so that you can see that overall, on a revenue side, we saw a decrease in our revenue year over year of just over $1.4 million. There are a couple of items that are contributing to that. If we take a look at taxation, that's a result of the increase in the tax levy that took place between 2011 and 2012. Within grants, we saw a reduction in funding as a result of funding we received in the previous year for an investment in an affordable housing program. So that's really related to stimulus funding that we had in previous years on social housing. Within fees and services, that increase is primarily driven by our billings on the water side and the sewer side. Those revenues fall within fees and services. These other items are not overly significant. The sale of land, that transaction in 2011 was the sale of land to Target. So that was $2.1 million. So that was that transaction of the year previous. If we move to the following slide, on the expenditure side, our expenditures really overall were relatively flat year over year. If we look at the variances, though, as it breaks down amongst categories within social and family services, that variance is driven by the reversal of the liability that took place in social services this year. So the reversal of that ODSP liability that we didn't end up paying out. Within transportation services, that's really as a result of multiple items, including amortization cost. And in recreation and cultural services, that again is a result of some amortization costs, which is reflected in our financial statements, and then also a couple of other expenditures, including some increase in staffing as a result of the Benson Center, I believe, as well as the library roof component is in those areas as well. Under general government, part of that reduction is as a result of reduced payments to the hospital. So in 2011, we would have paid $2.4 million to the hospital. 2012, we paid $1 million. Or sorry, we paid $1.4 million. On the next slide, I think that when Mr. Markle and Mr. Pollock get up to make a presentation to council, you will hear them speak to the city's accumulated surplus. So I thought I would just take a slide, talk a little bit about the accumulated surplus, because it's not quite the same. It's not the same at all as how we refer to surpluses year over year in our budget. So the city's accumulated surplus essentially is really the net worth of the city. So it takes a look at the net book value of all of our assets, less all of our liabilities, and at the end of the day, really, that is your accumulated surplus overall. So I wanted to also indicate that from 2011 to 2012, there's a couple of fairly significant items that have affected that number, which again, I think you'll see once we go through the financial statements formally. But the one biggest item is the investment in our wastewater treatment plant. Another fairly significant item is that we took on some debt to make the long-term financing arrangement for the Benson Center. I think that as well, what we should anticipate seeing over the next couple of years with the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant, you're going to see continued increased numbers on our accumulated surplus. So that number should grow over the next couple of years. I also like to highlight maybe a couple of the major infrastructure and capital projects that took place in the previous year. So in 2012, we had the completion of the Industrial Park Road project. So that was a fairly significant project. There's a photo, and that's the Target Distribution Center in the background. If we just move on to the following slide, you can see that that total project cost was $7.5 million. And so there's some of the benefits listed here, but what it's done is it's added 290 acres that have been accessed within the business park. It's accommodated 1.4 million square feet for distribution center space. It also has eliminated an unsafe traffic configuration at the problem at the intersection of 10th and Boundary Road. And it's providing a secondary link from the business park to McConnell Avenue. What's really, I think, important to note in this project, the project cost was $7.5 million. But if I get you to take a look at the very bottom of this slide, funding from the tax base was $250,000. So much of that funding came between the sale of the land, the Eastern Ontario Development Fund, Transport Canada, the CNR Railway, and the federal gas tax. So it was a good utilization of funding from multiple sources. If we move to the following slide, this is just a list of some of the major capital projects that were completed in 2012. So there were several projects with our transportation network. There was Industrial Road to 10th Street. We had asphalt resurfacing on various streets. And we had sidewalk construction at various locations as well. Within transit, we purchased 3 pre-owned transit buses. We purchased a pre-owned handy transit bus, and we replaced the roof in the building. Within fire services, we purchased an aerial truck ladder, a heavy rescue truck, and a pumper truck. We had several renovations to our buildings. There was a couple of enhancements within Parks and Recreation. And then on the water and sewer side, we had storm and combined sewer separation projects. We had water main rehabilitation improvements. And we had the complete reconstruction of the underground and surface work at Pine Street and Jobin Avenue. We have certainly the city's most significant capital project still undergoing currently, and it will be throughout this year and into next year as well. And that's the expansion of our secondary wastewater treatment plant. So the total project cost is $57 million. Here's a nice aerial photo of the work that's being done. Towards the bottom section of the photo, you can certainly see the building structure and part of the treatment of that facility. But sort of midway up in that photo and all the way down to Montreal Road, you can see how that is all construction relating to the expansion of that plant. So it really is quite a spectacular photo, and it is a very significant project. As of December the 31st, about 35.8% of the contract value had been performed. So on the following slide, I just wanted to provide a summary of where we're at with that project. And if we want to take a look at the right-hand side, when we look at city funding, starting in 2009, the city made a contribution to reserves just under $1 million, and then we made a contribution in 2010, 11, and 12 for $1 million each. So the money that we had contributed as of the end of December was just under $4 million. We had invested the money that we received from the province, the $18.5 million. Once it was received, we invested it and made the decision to reapply the interest income to the project to help reduce the city's requirement. And so that interest, so far as of the end of December, had yielded about $744,000. And then we had transfers from other projects within the sewer budget of just a little over $1.5 million that were transferred to be done in combination with this project at the same time. So our total dollars that were available at the end of 2012 were just under $6.3 million, so $6,256,000. And then the dollars that were available to be expended, as we take a look at the next couple of lines, will show that in 2010, the city expended $133,000, which was our portion, $1.2 million in 2011, and $5.1 million in 2012. There's a small portion of expenses that are 100% funded by the city. So the total of the city's costs were just under $6.5 million. And so at the very bottom, you'll see that there's basically an unfinanced amount of a little over $200,000. But we're not going to necessarily worry about that just yet, because we still have that $18.5 million that we received from the province. So until we use up all of the funds, and we're also getting funds from the federal government as we make claims, we'll be continuing to utilize those funds before we even think about any other type of finance. So the provincial funding was $18.5 million, and as of December 31st, we still have $11.5 million of that remains unspent. We had a receivable at the end of 2012 from the federal government of about $3.3 million, and that has since been paid. So our claims are being turned around, I think, reasonably once we submit them to the federal government. On this slide, this is just, I guess, a little bit of information with respect to the Brookdale Avenue, North Channel Bridge, Water Street to 7th Street project. I think that Mr. Levac has in the past provided a little bit of information to council, but there's 4 contracts with respect to this project. And the first contract was basically getting the in-water bridge foundations completed, and that has happened. The second contract really is a big part of the city's capital projects. It's a project in the amount of $2.6 million, and it's the upgrade of the combined sewer overflow, and that's a deep construction work that will take place along Brookdale Avenue and the sewer separation. So what we've done is, down on the bottom of this slide, we've broken out how that's being funded. So there was money set aside in 2011 and 2012 of about $1.5 million combined. And then in 2013, we set aside another $1.1 million. So that is the funding that we have set aside for that work that's being done starting this year. If we move on to the next slide, this is just a summary. I'm not really going to go through all of them, but this is just a summary of other major capital projects that are continued into 2013. There's several of them, but it's really just a summary. On the following slide, this is just a highlight of our progress funds and our reserve funds. So you can see that the opening balance for the progress funds is $25 million. You can see that the expenditures on the capital side to date, since the life of the fund has been just under $10.3 million. There have been some other types of expenditures from the called current fund, just under $6 million. And the investment income from the progress fund since inception is $16,783,000. Down below, we have other reserve funds indicated at $4.2 million, and the downtown investment fund of $3.5 million. So those are our reserve funds. To look at the following slide, this is just showing how our reserve funds have compared from 2007 through 2012. And you'll see that from 2009 to 2010, there's a fairly significant jump in our reserve balances. And again, that's because of the $18.5 million that we received from the province. And so what you're going to see beyond, like once you can see the transition from 2011 and 2012, you can see the outflow of close to $10 million as it relates to that project. And you're going to see that continue in 2013. So you're going to see that money that we have set aside we've spent. Overall, I think that we'd like to tell you that what you'll hear tonight is that overall our reserve position is quite financially sound. If we move to the next slide, we just wanted to put together a slide on our tangible capital assets. We've been talking about it now for a couple of years, and I'm showing that the net book value between 2011 and 2012 has increased by $20.8 million. And we've broken it out down here as a couple of items, so maybe I could just highlight a couple of the big items that took place. Under protection and health, that increase in value is primarily attributed to the purchase of our fire trucks and our ambulances. Under transportation services, a lot of that would be the improvements we've made to our roads, asphalt resurfacing, vehicles and equipment. Under the environmental services area, that would be the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. We move to the following slide. This is a breakdown of our assets by category, and it's also broken down that way as well in our financial statement. So what we wanted to show here on this slide again is your net book value of your assets are $325 million, but we also are showing assets that are under construction. So under water and sewer, you can see that that is your fairly significant wastewater treatment plant expansion. So that's where that project is showing right now currently. And if we move on to the following slide. It's just a one-page slide. Sometimes we talk about the city's financial position and our ability to borrow. We are issued a letter each year from the province on our, we call it an ARL, but it's our ability to make annual repayment payments on debt. So this is just an indication of the amount of debt that the province is saying we would be available to borrow. Not that we would ever recommend we'd ever take on any of that debt, but it just, again, shows the strength of the corporation financially overall. And then just in summary, just to highlight, back as we stated on our first page, we had surpluses in the amount of $543,000 that were contributed to various reserves. The secondary wastewater treatment plant is that major project that we have, and it's undergoing, it'll continue to be undergoing through to April 2014. Our reserve and reserve funds total $59.6 million as a result of part of that 18.5 still, we're having the benefit of that, although 11.5 is the amount that's really remaining as being unspent. This past year, we entered into a long-term financing agreement for the Benson Center, and as well for the EMS facility. So I think it's important to remind council and make note of that. And our city financial position continues to be very strong, and we're well positioned to finance that major infrastructure project that we're currently undergoing. So with that, certainly any questions from council, I'd be happy to.
Financial officer?
Just a question on the ARL. I always find that striking how much the province suggests that we could possibly borrow. So how will, I know that right now we're paying for the EMS building and the Benson Center.
Correct.
How much payment are we going to be making once we finish the wastewater treatment plant? Do we know how much that's going to represent?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we've done some preliminary work on that. I don't have it handy this evening, but I think we're anticipating, for the most part, right now the city's been contributing $1 million every year to the reserve for that project. So when the project is completed, that $1 million that we've been contributing towards the project should be more than sufficient to cover any long-term financing payments. So that's just going to, so that's really already built into the costs that the ratepayers are paying for the sewer side. What's not currently built into the budget or might be an additional cost might be the operating cost for the facility. Now, I don't think $1 million is required on an annual basis, so we don't need that entire amount for financing. So part of that will be there to offset part of the operating costs of the expansion of that plant or that facility. But there might still be some additional amounts that might need to be added to the budget on the operating side.
Do we know how much we're going to have to borrow?
We have, at this point in time, yeah, we do know how much we're gonna have to, we've approximated how much we're gonna have to borrow. I mean, the project, our portion of it is about 18.5 million, and we've set aside about 6 million in reserves for it. So it's probably depending on how the project ends up, plus our investment income, we're probably looking at somewhere between 12 and 14 million.
And it still doesn't even get us anywhere close to what our...
No.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Rivette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, Maureen, a report like this is basically, you're very confident that you're looking after things the way it should be. You're accessing all the interest you can from some of these funds from the province. Hopefully, maybe the feds might make a mistake and send it all to so you can get more interest. But I think it's, I'm very satisfied the way things are going, and I think it's congratulations to you and your department for doing an excellent job.
Thank you.
Any questions, Ms. Adams? I'll ask Ms. Adams to move the first reading. The chair can introduce Mr. Markham, Mr. Pollak.